is not what's happening. These people are public servants. They are doing their job. It is a federal crime to be influenced and to have any sort of conflict of interest. Partisan or biased organizations will FOIA any emails that have to do with women's health or with a specific action that the FDA has taken. Because we know that they do this, they FOIA those emails, then they find out the person's name and they do what's called doxing you. They can post on social media, hey, Jane Doe, who works at the FDA, she worked on the approval for the abortion drug. She worked on the approval for the birth control going over the counter. She is a Biden plant. And they put a big sign up that said, the FDA has closed this clinic down. Like, call the FDA, and they put the media relations phone number at the bottom of that sign. I am no longer employed by the FDA. I was reduced on April 1st. On April 1st, the entire media team at the FDA was riffed.
When the FDA speaks, the entire pharmaceutical world listens. Today we're going behind the scenes with someone who helped shape how the FDA communicates with the world. Shannon Hatch, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Shannon Hatch is a strategic public affairs leader with more than 20 years of experience in health and biomedical science communications. Her career spans government service at the federal level, spanning 4 administrations, where she provided a lot of unique insight into the public health communications era during times of political change. Shannon most recently served as the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Media Affairs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, where she guided media strategy and operations aligned with the agency's overall priorities on the regulatory side. In this role, Shannon provided high-level counsel to FDA leadership, and she oversaw a team of 16 public affairs professionals where she managed crisis and effective communications for various topics across the agency's expansive portfolio. She was involved in a lot of interesting initiatives we're going to talk about today, things related to e-cigarettes, women's health, non-prescription drugs, and even the COVID-19 pandemic. So, Shannon, a lot of people, especially in the last year, there's been a lot in the media about the FDA. Marty McCary, who now heads up the division, has been putting a lot of information out there about things like national priority vouchers, things related to some of the work that he's doing on the HHS side. So there's been a lot happening in the news, especially with Trump RX just a week or two ago. So a lot of people are trying to understand, wait, what is the FDA? What does the FDA actually do? What's the overall mandate of the FDA? So maybe let's just start there. Explain to our audience, who is the FDA? What do they do?
Sure. So the FDA, in the simplest term, the FDA protects public health of all Americans. And they do that by regulating a variety of products. So anything from all the food that is, sold in the United States to drugs, as we know. So that's the Food and Drug Administration. But there's also biologics under the umbrella, and gene therapies and other types of treatments, devices, and the FDA regulates tobacco products, and that includes electronic tobacco products or electronic cigarettes. So basically, that is what the FDA is there to do, is to use science to help protect public health.
So one of the things that people wonder is the FDA's relationship with the pharmaceutical industry. Some people said, you know what, maybe they're kind of too close, in bed with each other. A lot of people that worked at the FDA go to the industry and vice versa. Tell us about that. What is it really like?
Yeah, that is a criticism that has dogged the FDA for many years. And when I was on the outside of the FDA, before I joined in 2020, I sort of thought that might have been true as well, as a lay person not really knowing the inside. When you get to the FDA, when you work for the FDA, there are a ton of ethics review that you need to go through, or that individuals, and it's heightened at the FDA compared to other agencies because the FDA regulates market-moving industries. Mm-hmm. Because of all of those ethics reviews, the individuals that are reviewing drug applications, that are inspecting food supply and all of that, they have to be completely firewalled from owning stock or anything, having any kind of connection to those industries, to regulated industry. As there's so many checks and balances to keep that sort of barrier, those firewalls, that people keep the industry at an arm's length. They don't have, they're not calling their buddies at the company that they're for the drug application that they're working on. That's not, people imagine that that's what's happening, and that is not what's happening. These people are public servants. They are doing their job to review the applications, do the inspections, and do all of the, testing the safety of the products independently, and not with any kind of coercion or any kind of connection to those industries. Now, guidances and policies and all of that need to have stakeholder input. It needs to have input from industry, from the people that are being regulated, or the organizations that are being regulated. So industry has some connection and participates in a very public and transparent way through development of guidances and development and finalization of rules. So there is a way for industry to have an influence at the FDA, but it has to be all above board and all legal and under, with the scrutiny of public attention.
Yeah.
So through a formal legal process. So I don't think that there is a major problem of the FDA being too cozy with industry. I do know and recognize, we have to admit that when people leave the FDA, they often go to regulated industry, because regulated industry values the perspective of the individuals at the FDA.
Yeah.
And that's just a reality of any industry. So I don't think that people are changing their behavior while they're FDA employees. They're not changing their North Star while they're still doing the work of protecting the American public and protecting public health.
Yeah. And I think, part of it is there's always conspiracy theorists out there,
Exactly.
right? And so people wonder.
Yeah.
But I agree with you, right? I myself worked in the pharmaceutical industry for many, many years. And, there were colleagues that went over to the government side, then maybe later on came back. And some people looking at it as going to the dark side, or that you're going to be corrupted somehow or whatnot. But I agree. I think in the end of the day, it really boils down to that particular individual, if they have any nefarious or unethical, intentions. But it's not something that I think that people need to know that. It's not something that's, within the FDA as a whole, that they're looking to try to get, some type of favors done for the industry or whatnot. But in the end of the day, what I've seen in my interactions with the FDA, and I've been to the FDA many times, both as the founder of the ACMA, but also when I worked in the pharma industry, what I found was people were really trying to do what was best in the public interest.
Yeah, they are. And it is a federal crime to be influenced and to have any sort of conflict of interest. If you're reviewing an application for a medical device or a medical product, or in the food industry, it is a crime to use inside information to benefit regulated industry. So if that were to happen, there would have to be an investigation and a legal process and a sort of a airing it out in a court of law, so to speak, and that because it would be committing a crime, and they have to be prosecuted for a crime, and then have that conversation, in a court of law, and then that is, so, and that's not happening. So no individuals at the FDA that I can tell have broken the law to the point of, there being an investigation and a prosecution. So people in the court of public opinion, but that's, like you said, that's conspiracy theories. Those are, people making connections that aren't necessarily there.
Yeah, don't exist.
Yeah.
So tell us, your time at the FDA.
Yeah.
What would you say was the most difficult media situation that you had to deal with, or story you had to deal with?
The most difficult? I joined the FDA in August of 2020. Okay. So we were, 5 months into the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the big issue at that time was testing and, getting tests that were accurate and things like that. And then vaccines obviously became part of the conversation, as well as treatments. That was a huge challenge because we were all working remotely. We were on phone calls every single morning, like 90 people, trying to find out what transpired today or yesterday or overnight that we have to deal with now. The biggest media story, though, that I have found are the ones that have political implications. So women's health is a big one because of the political interest, or the interest in, the very polarized political opinions about whether or not a woman, should have access to abortion drugs.
Abortion, yeah.
But also over-the-counter birth control was approved for over-the-counter use during my time at the FDA. And those, when you work on things like that for communications and media relations like I do, you're brought in sort of at the tail end, where you can find, you're like, okay, we're about to take this action. We need to be prepared for all these questions. We need to be able to handle this. So there's a lot of inside baseball, inside emails, interior emails going back and forth about what, describing what's going on and what's happening. And your names get, attached to those emails. And when you're part of the federal government, anything that you write in an email can be released under FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And so it's a verb in the federal government to get FOIA'd. So some very, partisan or biased organizations will FOIA any emails that have to do with women's health or with a specific action that the FDA has taken. And so because we know that they do this, they FOIA those emails, then they find out the person's name and they do what's called doxing you. And so they could post on a website or on, social media, not just a website. They could post on social media, hey, Jane Doe, who works at the FDA, she worked on the approval for the abortion drug. She worked on the approval for the birth control going over the counter. She is a Biden plant. She shouldn't be, involved. And right. So having your name, as an individual person working at the FDA, having your name become public through that method, we're constantly worried about that. So we do what we do is phone calls and handling media inquiries through generic inboxes that don't have anybody's name attached to them.
Wow.
Because so there's a lot of extra stuff that you have to do just to communicate with your colleagues.
They can't FOIA the general inbox? Well, I guess
they can, but then there's no name associated with it.
Right, there's no name associated.
Yeah, so don't put your signature block on the emails.
But the calls aren't recorded.
The calls are not recorded.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, these are just phone calls to okay, tell me what the action is, tell me tell me what's going on, that kind of stuff.
And I guess you could argue, especially after what happened with Charlie Kirk, it could put people at risk.
It could,
there's
yeah.
a lot of people out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of risk. And so I was a federal employee for 15 years, 10 years at NIH and 5 years at FDA. And the thing that I found through all of my colleagues, my smart, savvy, wonderful colleagues at both NIH and the FDA, is that we're public servants. We are nonpartisan. We have to be nonpartisan. We can't take an action based on politics. So for the individuals who are doing their jobs, not because they are an advocate for over-the-counter birth control, not because they, dislike the idea of over-the-counter birth control, they have to do what they're legally required to do. If there's an application before the FDA, there's a timeline that application needs to be reviewed. Those public servants need to do the work, review the science, and apply their knowledge to move that application forward, whether it's approve it or not approve it, or give it a complete response letter. So those individuals, those are public servants, and they are not doing it for partisan politics or political reasons. So for them to be sort of doxed, as I said, put out on blast,
or targeted
by a select few, that's a problem, and it's a risk that I didn't worry about until I was at the FDA. Basically, I didn't really. I thought about it a few times. There were a few controversial things that I had to deal with at the National Cancer Institute at NIH. But at the FDA, there's a lot more. When you make an action at the FDA, and Janet Woodcock said this, and I know you know Janet, so she always said, whatever action the FDA takes, there are going to be people who are not happy about it and people who are happy about it. And it all depends on how loud those organizations and groups are. So you're always going to have, it's so polarizing. And it's not just those political things, but those are the most dangerous and most risky.
I was surprised you said women's health, because you joined in August 2020. I thought you would have said COVID.
I should, yeah. I mean, it was a big challenge to commute, but it was a fire hose, right? So
yeah.
It was just the reality of our life in 2020 and 2021 was just every morning, get on the phone. What are the actions that happened? What news came out last night? How are we going to respond to this? We're going to get inquiries about that. All of these different topics. So,
like during that time, what were the biggest inquiries you got related to COVID, for example?
Related to COVID, well, the biggest misstep I think was when the emergency use authorization for convalescent plasma, which happened the month that I joined. So I really don't know all of the details. But that was a hairy time for the FDA because there was some misinterpretation of the statistics that were cited. The other, authorizing the vaccines, putting out guidances about variants and developing monoclonal antibodies for different COVID variants. The challenge with COVID was that it was just a steady stream of, like I said, a fire hose. So it was just constant deluge of information, and what do we have to communicate? What is the most, the most basic information that we have to communicate? And it's, this was authorized. This treatment was authorized to treat COVID. When Paxlovid was authorized, and all of the monoclonal antibodies. The biggest one that I was involved with, because I wasn't involved with the vaccines at that time, but I worked on the treatment. I worked on the media relations for anything related to the treatments. So monoclonal antibodies, I don't know if you know this, but I'm sure some people in your audience do, but they could be effective against one variant, and then as the virus mutates, they're not going to be effective for the next one. So we would authorize them, and then looking at the data over time, we would deauthorize some. So when we deauthorized one of the monoclonal antibodies, and I want to say could have been 2021 or 2022, I can't remember exactly. But when we deauthorized one based on the variants that were circulating at the time, a state had ordered a lot of that particular drug, the monoclonal antibody in question. I'm not going to use a name. I'm not going to tell you the state either.
Okay.
We could probably guess. The state had ordered a lot of that to have on their shelves, and they set up all these mobile clinics for to treat people quickly who had COVID, to use these monoclonal antibodies. Mm-hmm. And we deauthorized it. And so they had basically a lot of, drugs on their shelf that they couldn't use. They had clinics set up that were no longer.
But did they know it was deauthorized?
They knew it was deauthorized, and so they had all these clinics that were advertised as, citizens can come and get treated for COVID. Drive up, and we'll give you, you an infusion of this drug. And they had to close all those down, and they put a big sign up that said, "This clinic is closed because the FDA." This had to be after 2021 because it was when the Biden administration was in office. The FDA has closed this clinic down. Like, call the FDA, and they put the media relations phone number at the bottom of that sign.
Oh my gosh, what a nightmare.
Or the public inquiries.
So now they're all reaching out to you guys.
So now we were getting not only reporters asking us, which we announced it. We put out the information that we needed to put out. It's like very simple. The variants are, the virus is evolving. There are different variants. This treatment is less effective at treating the currently circulating variants. And here's the CDC data to back it up. We were in lockstep with CDC and NIH and HHS, the public emergency folks at HHS. And we had it all communicated and clear on our website in public documents, but because a particular state felt blindsided by the deauthorization of this particular drug, they made it a public affairs fight. And that was the first time that I really saw that in my career. And that sort of brings me to a point of the evolution of health communications or science communications in the past 15 years. The biggest, determinant of that, in my opinion, is social media. And back in 2009, when I first joined NIH as a contractor, social media was sort of a new thing. Facebook had been around for a while, and Twitter was, probably, just ramping up around then. And we all were like, oh, this is exciting. We can put our information on Twitter. We can make little videos, put them on Instagram. And it was, we're going to democratize science. We're going to communicate these facts about cancer research or about, eventually COVID. We're going to communicate through these various channels. And that was exciting, and it is exciting. But what I didn't anticipate personally is what social media has created is echo chambers. And the echo chambers can create nefarious individuals who either, purposely put out disinformation, or the conspiracy theories that we talked about before, creating misinformation stories. And those little pockets of the, of the internet where the social media has created a way for individuals, to get to those sort of those little stories or conspiracy theories, and the misinformation and disinformation that's happening, that is what is a huge challenge to health and science communications now that I didn't anticipate, and that I'm really, quite frankly, sad about. And I don't want to say I blame social media. I guess I kind of do, though. I mean, we're sitting here on a podcast, and it's going to be on TikTok and Instagram, and I just want to encourage everybody who's listening to actually, not do your research, because that's what the conspiracy theorists say anyway. But question who's giving you that message, and what the story is, and dig deeper, and like, what are people's motivations, and is it a conspiracy theory, or is it actual fact? And trust find trusted sources.
I think with COVID in particular, part of the challenge was, just to play devil's advocate, I think part of the challenge was some of the information that was coming out, even from the trusted, government agencies, it later was recanted, or later it changed. I mean, the masks are a good example.
Exactly.
Don't wear masks, wear masks, masks, and then again, masks don't matter, that type of thing.
Right.
I think that was one. I think the second thing, too, that people questioned was how quickly a vaccine came out.
Right.
That was a big deal. I mean, I just know from working in the industry, it takes about 10 years to develop a vaccine, usually, on average. This came out very, very quickly. So people, I think, questioned that. It's supposed to be a positive thing.
Right.
But still, people questioned it, right? And I think the third element is that now there's stories coming out from a lot of the social media leaders, right, on Meta and on X, et cetera, before Elon Musk had taken over, that apparently the Biden administration was trying to influence what information went out. So I think part of that fuels these suspicions that maybe this misinformation isn't necessarily misinformation, and that all information should be out there. And to your point, then you can kind of judge and assess for yourself, do your homework, and determine where the truth really lies. Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
And a big reason or problem is that the people in the people that are doing the research, the science, the people in academic health institutions, or at the NIH or CDC or FDA, the ones that are doing that, we're living in that echo chamber, right? And so we trust when a doctor from the NIH tells us, wear a mask. Oh, now you don't have to wear a mask. Oh, now you do have to wear a mask. Or if you're this far away, you don't. If you're outside, then you don't. And all of those different. I would get confused as an individual who doesn't have a medical training background, but I, obviously spent my entire career in it. I would get confused and be like, wait, what am I supposed to do? And I would just try to listen to, figure out, but I would trust the NIH. Right. I mean, I just naturally would, because I worked there for 10 years.
Sure.
So what we maybe underestimated, and communicators, across the federal government and academic institutions and others, maybe underestimated what the other echo chambers could do to the confusing messaging.
Yeah.
I mean, but the pandemic, I mean, we were saying this throughout the entire first 3 years of the pandemic. This has never happened before. Unprecedented. Everything was unprecedented.
Right.
So we didn't have a playbook for this. Just like right now in 2025, we're in an unprecedented situation too. We don't have a playbook for how to communicate and how to move everything forward under the administration that is that is currently in the HHS and NIH and FDA.
So during moments of crisis, whether it's the pandemic, a drug recall, a drug shortage, or a safety issue, talk to me a little bit about the communication philosophy in the FDA as it comes to how you communicate information outside to the world.
Right. So, I mean, you think of what the announcement is, how many people it affects, is it a common disease that this whatever the product is it treating a common disease? Is it a product that is used by general consumers out there, widely used? And you basically, just based on that information, decide what level of attention you want to give the announcement. So the FDA can't do a press release for every drug that it approves, but it must do some sort of communication for every drug recall or for every compliance action. That information has to be published on the FDA's website to, communicate to the world that, widely that certain, things are not safe to use and that you should look in your medicine cabinets or your kitchen pantry. So that we basically decide what level of hype or how big of a megaphone we want to use based on how many people it's going to affect and what news, based on how many people it's going to affect and what risk, how severe of a risk, the safety issues could be.
Got you. Talk to us a little bit about OPDP, right? The Office of Prescription Drug Promotion, and maybe what that does.
Yeah.
Because there's been a lot of, in the news lately this year, especially about commercials going
Right.
out on television about drugs. Explain to us kind of how all that works.
So OPDP is the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. It is an office within the Center of Drug Evaluation and Research, CDER, which is the largest center at the FDA. So most of your audience will probably have heard of CDER. There are two other centers at the FDA that also regulate medical products. That would be CBER, Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, and CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health. CDRH.
Lots of acronyms.
And then there's, CVM for veterinary medicine, and then there's CTP and Human Food Program. So OPDP is under the CDER umbrella. So they are specifically focused on prescription drugs, Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. And the way the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is written is, the rules that have been introduced, they regulate manufacturers, packers, and distributors of prescription drugs. So those companies and how they promote their prescription drugs, OPDP within CDER is responsible for regulating that. So if those companies were to, put out an advertisement for a drug without including all of the appropriate side effect warnings and all of that, OPDP would issue a warning letter and then escalate the compliance actions from there. They can only do that with those entities that I mentioned, manufacturers, packers, and distributors of drugs. So there's a gap because what you're seeing now, pretty much since COVID-19 pandemic, the telehealth companies that are directly, that are promoting some sort of drug product on social media and other places, those are not manufacturers and distributors of drugs. So the FDA doesn't regulate those companies. So if FTC regulates advertising and the Office of Prescription Drug Promotion regulates the promotion of prescription drugs those advertisements made by the manufacturers of that drug, it's a question of who regulates a company that just started up. You and I could start a company right now and advertise like Dr. So-and-so is available to take your calls and they will name a specific drug in their advertisement. We could name a specific drug in our advertisement and it wouldn't be illegal.
But that would be only if we're not the manufacturer of the drug, right?
Right.
Because the manufacturer is still under OPDP.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about, so the world we deal with at the ACMA is we're accrediting and certifying pharmaceutical reps,
Right.
medical affairs professionals that are going out talking to doctors, educating them, or if they're reps, they're selling to them. Within the FDA, in your time that you were there for those 5 years, did that come up at all? Like, was there a concern by the FDA about how pharmaceutical companies are educating doctors or selling the doctors? Did that come up at all?
That did not come up it didn't reach my level. I think that at CDER, the Office of Communications within CDER, they might have, known more about that, but it wasn't an issue that raised to the level of mainstream media interest.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because, one of the things that happened in 2019, if you remember, was the opioid crisis.
Right. Well, the opioid crisis started way before 2019.
Well, it hit, but it kind of
became a public health emergency in 2019.
It really hit the media at the media
Right.
level. I was constantly in the media talking about the opioid crisis. Really began in 2019.
Yeah.
But you're right. Obviously, it started years and years ago. The reason why I bring it up is because when I had met with the FDA at the top level, there was concern about what pharma companies were going to do to make sure that the information in general that they were providing doctors was more fair and ethical because of the opioid crisis. So I think the opioid crisis created a lot more awareness. It was kind of like a watershed moment because it was like, well, wait.
We have to change the way we're doing things.
Exactly. We have to change the way we're doing things. And that's why I asked the question whether that was something that was discussed. It sounds like for you in the media side, it was not.
Well, I want to clarify the opioid crisis was definitely something that we dealt with in the media side. I mean, any action that we took around opioids, and we always had, we had to make an announcement about those things. But my office wasn't responsible for communicating to the healthcare providers. So I don't know the details and the inner workings of exactly what CEDAR was working on directly with healthcare providers and medical affairs staff.
Gotcha.
That would have addressed this. But any actions that we took that were to mitigate the opioid crisis were certainly got attention. We issued press releases on every guidance that we issued that would be useful for pharmaceutical companies in the pain management space. We would pay close attention to all of the actions, all of the developments. When Narcan was approved for over-the-counter use, we obviously were part of that. But in terms of communicating with the healthcare providers about how to reduce over prescribing and those issues, that wasn't necessarily as handled by the media team.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Do you think though that the FDA maybe should have gotten involved
but the FDA was involved.
Well, more from the side of trying to enforce pharma companies to hold them maybe to a higher standard in terms of how they were doing business?
I mean, so now I feel like this whole line of, because there are so many things that were done that I might not remember.
Sure.
Because it was, basically in the media affairs office, this might be useful. In the media affairs office, we have to deal with like the crisis of the moment. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you deal with so many crises in a month, you don't remember what the crisis was a year ago.
Right.
So looking back on my 5 years, there were so many announcements that we made about opioids and issues to protect the American public and reduce overprescribing and all of, working through the systems that the levers that we could pull to address the opioid public health emergency. But I don't remember each and every storyline and how it built as a sort of a strategic plan for the overall, because there were so many more people involved than just me.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, no, you know what it is, and I know it's a controversial topic.
Yeah.
I bring it up because for me personally, in the work that we're doing over the last 10 years, I do think that pharmaceutical companies need to change how they're going out and communicating with doctors in the sense of making sure at least that the people that are doing that communication directly, which are really the pharmaceutical reps, the medical science liaisons, there's some type of standard that's there. Mm-hmm. We do that through certification. And if you look at any other profession, whether it's a physician, a lawyer, an accountant, a barber, everybody has a license or a certification. It just always surprised me, prior to us coming to existence in 2015, there was no standard actually for pharma professionals. Right, yeah. I just thought that was kind of irresponsible. So and which is one of the reasons why, when I met with the FDA, I thought that it was something that they would be interested in, and they were. To Janet Woodcock's credit, it was something that she fully supported and thought was very, very important, because she recognized that medical science liaisons in particular, they're impacting doctors in terms of the research they do and how they prescribe drugs. So to her credit, she did see that as a value. My only reason for bringing it up was I just was curious if it was something that at a bigger level was something that was discussed internally. It sounds like maybe it could have been, but you weren't involved in that.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
How do you think public trust in health communication has evolved over the 4 administrations you've served, and what lessons should industry take from that shift?
Yeah, so it's evolved greatly. Before the pandemic, the major shift was in the pandemic, and I think you brought up a few points earlier about the emerging science at the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic was, difficult to, we didn't know what we didn't know, but we also needed to communicate what we, the best information we had at the time.
Right.
So that, I think, did a lot to hurt, our standing in terms of public trust. Science communication is complicated. It's, when you're communicating about emerging science, it's very complicated. You have to give people very simple instructions, and that's not easy to do. So in terms of how it's evolved under the last 4 administrations, NIH felt like a very bipartisan, kumbaya, everybody on the Hill, was like, why would I vote against cancer research? Why would I vote against, Alzheimer's research? NIH had a very good relationship, it seemed like, and had a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. That is not the case now, it seems. And I'm not just speaking about NIH, but, all of HHS agencies, and we know what's happening at CDC also. And that is a result of people not trusting CDC and FDA and NIH. And it's soul crushing to me as a person who worked, for those agencies for the 15 years that I did. But so what's,
why do you think they don't trust them though?
Because of social media. I mean, I'm gonna go back to the same.
Back to the social media.
Yeah. It's the echo chambers.
The echo chamber,
I mean, why it's people do trust NIH, FDA, and CDC, but not all people do, and the echo chamber can either amplify that or make you blind to what the other side is saying. Mm-hmm. So the people who don't trust, the people in the echo chambers where the trust is, questioned, seem to be winning right now, and we're all just treading water on the other side, and it's concerning. And I don't know how pharmaceutical companies or medical health professionals or academic medical institutions, I don't know how we can solve this problem. I mean, it's really, I wish that I had the secret recipe, but the evolution is really down to those echo chambers created by social media. And even having, like, if we were to, completely flip the switch right now, and tomorrow we would have an HHS secretary and a president and people, members of Congress who say, you need to trust the FDA, you need to trust what they say, you need to trust CDC, and here's how you can trust us, even if they were to totally flip, their positioning and not, be scrutinizing those agencies. I think that the way we communicate has to change, and I just don't know what the secret recipe is to making those changes.
Yeah, it's a tough question, because I think it kind of also borders this discussion on free speech and whether the government should regulate free speech, and
whether social media platforms like YouTube should be suppressing videos that are not based in science. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the rise, I mean, one of the things about social media, and particularly being in media relations, when you're trained in, in a journalist training in his or her career, when you're still in university and beyond, in the early parts of your career, you have journalistic ethics and standards that you have to meet. You can't be biased. You have to look at a story from a balanced point of view perspective. People on social media are acting like journalists, but they're not trained in journalistic integrity and journalistic ethics. Right. So that is, I mean, social media is what scares me the most.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you see a lot of people that claim to be an expert in something.
Yeah.
And now it's like, there's this one well-known psychologist, I'm not going to say who, great clinical psychologist, but now I'm finding that this individual is talking about politics and talking about all these other things, that it's just made me wonder what made this person now an expert in all these other areas,
And it's like me claiming to be an expert on the FDA when I've only been there for 5 years.
Right.
I'm not claiming to be an expert on the FDA. I was one, public servant in a sea of thoughtful, intelligent, wonderful people who are all, science-driven, mission-driven, following the North Star of protecting public health. And no one person at the FDA is an expert on everything going on at the
Absolutely
FDA.
not.
Yeah, but
talk to us a little bit of, obviously in the news we've been hearing a lot about the cuts and the reduction of the workforce at the federal level. Talk to us a little bit about that. How do you think that's going to impact things in terms of innovation and research, and how has that impacted you?
Well, in terms of communications, well, it's impacted me, but I am no longer employed by the FDA. I was reduced on April 1st. I was subject to a reduction in force action on April 1st. The entire media team at the FDA was riffed on April 1st.
So wait, what do they do now for media communications and PR?
That is an excellent question. I am so glad you asked. So I have to sort of tell you about the structure of HHS communications. It's basically that there's, in every agency within the HHS, there's the top of the iceberg, so to speak, or the pyramid, would be HHS Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, ASPA. It's an office, the office of the ASPA. And they need to keep their finger on the pulse of every action happening across all of the agencies within the HHS. So CDC, NIH, and FDA is included in that, but there's many more, SAMHSA and others. Mm-hmm. So ASPA have media affairs staff and public affairs staff that need to really be jack of all trades and understand a lot of different issues and topics. And then, down another level, the people at FDA need the public affairs staff, including myself and the team that I worked on, we all need to be an expert on, a lot of things going on at the FDA, or keep our finger on the pulse of a lot of things going on at NIH similarly. So it can get a lot more granular the deeper you go down. So when a journalist asks a question, they want to get to that granular level. They want to talk to the expert, right? They want to talk to, if they're talking to the press officer, they're going to really grill them and and try and test out, like, how much do you actually know about this question that I'm asking? Mm-hmm. Or they're going to want to talk to the scientific experts that are, that are actually doing the work. They want to drill down even further. So journalists want access, and that access to, and you've seen what happened to DOD, and how they're trying to control access. So at HHS, the ASPA completely turned over in January 2025. So the entire staff. So it used to be that there would be a political appointee and a few others that would change with the secretary. But in 2025, a lot more than one person, a lot more people. So the entire staff was new. And then 2 months later, they riffed the media affairs team at the FDA. I don't know the specifics of NIH and CDC and other agencies, but I know that a lot of communication staff across across HHS were riffed. So now when a journalist calls and asks a question, their call goes to ASPA. They don't want to get granular. So that's who is communicating on behalf of all of HHS agencies is one office. So I think they have they're going to have a difficult road to get to that granular level. So journalists can't expect basically more granular than the press release that was put out, the headline that we put out. And when I say we, I mean HHS.
You mean HHS.
Not me.
Right. You obviously, we hear our president talk a lot about the fake media and the fake news. In your experience, when you give a journalist, a story,
right,
do you find that the integrity of that story in terms of how fair balanced it is maintained in the final publication, or is there really a bias?
There's going to be, right bias, left bias, and people that are in the center. I think that one thing that we held close to is we didn't give exclusives to anybody, right? We didn't give priority or more access to any news organization. So we want to tell everybody the same information at the same time, and work to build those relationships with the reporters to make sure that they're telling that story accurately. So we care not about whether or not FDA looks good. We care about whether or not the news, that the action that we took is reported accurately in the news. Obviously, we also care about looking good, but the most important thing is that the coverage is accurate. And like I said before, what Dr. Woodcock taught me is that half of the people, half of the stakeholders are going to be upset with an action we took, and half of them are going to be happy about it. So those reporters have to tell both sides. They have to, sort of look at it from both perspectives and not just, take hook, line, and sinker, everything.
Right.
What was your question?
I was wondering whether or not the journalists maintain the integrity, the objectivity
So
of the story.
some of the journalists don't.
Yeah.
And they might not even be trained journalists. They might be, sort of advocates that are wearing journalist clothing.
Right.
Well,
that goes back to, where you get your information from and making sure it's a bona fide journalist. Yeah, it matters. Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. So anyway, so the impact of the RIFs, to go back to that, that theme, the impact of the RIFs are much greater than just the communications team. I can speak, confidently on our team that our entire media affairs staff was RIFed in April. A lot of other administrative functions were RIFed, but without a media affairs team, without reporters having access to the more, the savvy and the sort of inside the players within the FDA, without that, you're delaying information from getting out. You're putting up a fire. You're keeping the journalists at more arm's length and further away from the actual details and truth. But also, if you don't have a public affairs person like me saying, hey, this recall, this inspection happened so many days ago. When are we announcing this? We've got to put pressure on we either have to issue a press release ourselves, or we've got to put pressure on the company to issue a recall. And those negotiations are happening, and I shouldn't say negotiations. Those conversations are happening with the company about, when to issue when to tell the world that this product had a problem and needs to be recalled. Without us intervening and pushing the staff to communicate with the company about the recall, those recalls might be delayed. So the companies can, take even longer because the HHS ASPA staff is not at the granular level with the FDA.
So which means information gets out more slowly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's going to be more like instead of a fire hose, it's going to be a trickle, tiny little trickle. And when I say gonna be, we're already living it. So
do you think a lot of this could impact also the approval timelines of drugs, important drugs?
It seems like it has. I mean, I read an article in Stat News yesterday that is, saying that staffing is down in CDER and CBER, and that there are fewer drug approvals happening this year. So yeah, it seems like has happened and maybe will continue to happen. That's a widely reported in the news that could happen. I think that morale is probably low, and without the administrative functions to support those drug reviewers, it's probably not a good place to work, and they might be looking for work elsewhere. So not just
you would imagine.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit about AI. I have to ask you about AI and how, we talked about social media. That was kind of like the new evolution. Now I think the next revolution. The next
thing is AI.
AI. And with AI, I was telling someone this today, actually, I personally am not using Google as much. I use mostly AI now. How do you think AI is going to impact PR, media relations in terms of, again, how people consume news and information?
Right. I think that, there are good things and bad things from my perspective. The positive I will say is, we have access to so much stuff that can be aggregated at our fingertips by asking a sort of a granular, straightforward question and getting a very short soundbite.
Right.
But we're also creating, the behavior of I can quickly, just ask AI this question, spit out an answer. I'm going to read these talking points, but I don't really understand the issue that I'm talking about, because I'm just going from topic to topic to topic. So the sort of the attention span issue, I am concerned about that in my field of media relations and public affairs profession, of where you have to know a little bit about a lot of things. AI is going to have you know even less about a lot of things. Yeah. So you're not like a mile wide and an inch deep. You're a mile wide and a 1/16 of an inch deep. So there's a lot of information out there, and artificial intelligence is helping bring that information to our the forefront of our attention spans. But if we don't dig a little deeper into any one particular area, then we're not really going to fully understand it.
Yeah. What I will say that I do like about AI is when you do ask a question, it gives you kind of the, both perspectives. It gives you a good in-depth understanding of both perspectives. And I do think that's helpful versus, kind of scrolling on TikTok, because, the algorithms obviously are rigged in some ways based on what you like to watch.
Right.
So you're always going to get a very similar biased point of view. Whereas with AI, I am finding that it gives me more of, again, more of an objective perspective. There's this, here's one way to look at this, but here's another way to look at it.
Right.
And, here are the pros and
more
the cons.
Balanced, more,
So I do think that, but I agree with you. I think what's happening now is, whatever topic you want to know about, and versus, in the past, you might have had to go read a lot more, dig a lot more. All of that effort is gone.
Yeah,
right?
You don't have to put in as much time studying a thing or really, digging in and asking a lot of questions, because you're like, oh, this is easy. I can, I can just take this soundbite and use this.
Yeah. Well, there's actually studies that have been done. I think it was by Oxford that showed people who use AI consistently
I saw that
aren't
study
as
too.
smart.
Or they're becoming less smart over time.
Yes,
like they were smart at one point.
Right, that's what I mean. They're becoming less smart. Not that they're not as smart, but what's one thing that you want people to know about the FDA, just that you think that they're not aware of, they don't know about, or maybe a misconception?
Well, the misconception that FDA is, too closely aligned with industry that the FDA regulates, that is definitely a misconception. The FDA's North Star is protecting public health, protecting the health of all Americans through regulating these products.
Yeah.
And it is science and data driven. The one thing that we said all of the time in any situation is follow the science. We said it at the NIH too. Both NIH and FDA have that common mission of following the science. So what does the data show, and where are we going, and how do we explain that, new development without hyping it too much, but still providing hope. So following the science and being data driven is a cornerstone of the FDA. Mm-hmm. And that is, crucial that is continues in this administration.
I appreciate you bringing that up, but I think the other day I was watching a podcast. I think it was Tucker Carlson. He had a scientist on who was talking about COVID. And as I listened to it, if you kind of read between the lines, I think the issue, like in that case, was the information that came out originally was that the virus originated from a seafood or fish market in Wuhan and China, that came from bats. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's true. I mean, now they're saying it was created in the lab. I think a part of the challenge, though, and again, I think this goes back to transparency, is that I think had the government came out and said, we think it came from a fish market, but by the way, 4 or 5 years ago, there were studies being done looking at gain of function testing with the COVID vaccine, or COVID virus rather. I think that would have been more transparent and maybe could have made it more difficult for conspiracy theorists. Because I remember, one of the first things 2 or 3 months later was there was all this information about it. Well, there's these gain of function tests that are happening, or studies that had happened years ago. So why isn't this being talked about? So I don't think, both one is right and one is wrong. I just think part of it is that information probably should have just been out there.
Right.
So that people didn't then theorize and question, what's really happening, what are they trying to hide from us, that type of thing.
Sunlight is the best antiseptic, right? Like you have to be as transparent as possible and expose this all to the sunlight so that we can, so that, the full story is on display as early as possible. So share, be open and transparent as early as you can.
Yeah.
I don't think that it was a nefarious plot to hide anything. I think that it was just people don't understand what gain of function research is. So let's not try to explain it when we're in this, position of explaining whether or not you need to wear masks and how the, all of everything else works.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to the primary goal of the
science
FDA.
Communication.
Shannon, it was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
I did too. I hope it was helpful.
Very good. I'd like to have you back soon. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.